Hi viewers, today we are going to see Salesforce certification, business analyst certification preparation, part 20. So user stories, the document user stories in a version control repository to manage scope. Requirement gathered during the discovery stage of the project often evolve as more details describing user needs are revealed. Business analysts must keep track of all changes influencing the final version of user story, descriptions, and acceptance criteria. Updates made to user stories can also impact the scope of the project. Versioning of user story allows project teams to understand the changing requirement and the context for implemented changes. With version control system, team members can track changes applied to user stories across time. Git is an example of version control tool recommended by Salesforce for managing projects delivered on a platform. GitHub is a service provider for Git-based version control tool. Versioning of user stories tend to evolve as more detail are elicited in the additional requirement gathering session. Managing changing requirements. Business analysts can verify the previous state of user stories to control how they changed over time. Team collaborations on user stories. User stories versioning allow team members to more effectively collaborate on the changing project requirements. Organization of project documentation. With versioning of user stories, teams use store the full documentation of the project across iteration. Git and GitHub. Git is Salesforce recommended version control system that allows teams to manage project files. GitHub is a service provider for Git-based version control tools. Versioning of user stories. During discovery meetings, user stories previously created by business analysts tend to change as more details are elicited in the requirement gathering process. Importance of user story versioning. During the discovery stage of the project, business analysts elicit requirement and develop a plan for a delivery process. Gathered requirement can change over time as more information is collected during the scoping process. Update added to user stories must reflect the required changes to existing requirement. Once user stories are added to the sprint backlog, developers work on the most recent and relevant version. Previ- prevision, Previous version. Earlier version of user stories provide the team with the full context of understanding of how the future was registered at the first requirement gathering session and how it was modified later on. Version control tool allow teams to manage user stories by tracking changes applied to them. User stories complete documentation. Version control tools allow business analysts to review changes applied to previously created user stories. They are the single source of truth, defining what modifications were made, why they were applied, when they were added, and who made them. With the version controlled documentation of the project user stories, teams have an overview of changing requirement, returning to old version of the user story. Version control tools allow business analysts to review the modification that have been made inside the user story and if needed revert the original version they created. Consideration for user stories versioning. During project discovery and planning meetings, business analysts must consider how changes applied to user stories impact the scope of the project. User story elements. Versioning allows business analysts to note changes that influence the element of user stories, including acceptance criteria. Managing scope. Business analysts must ensure that changes applied to user stories do not negatively impact project scope. Refining user stories. Business analysts can refine user stories to add details that make them more accurate and precise. Sprint backlog. Once stories are added to sprint backlog and developers begin working on them, they must be in their final version. Benefits of user story versioning management. Keeping track of the changes applied to user stories, organized project documentation, and eases the management of requirement. Management of changing requirement teams manage changes to user stories and have the ability to verify the previous state of user story to control how the requirement have been improved after additional discovery meeting. Team collaboration. User story versioning allows team members to more effectively collaborate on the changing project requirements as each team member can modify the user story once they receive additional information. Organization of project documentation. Keep tracking of all changes applied to user stories in an organized way. Ensure that teams have full project documentation, including the change log, what with date, status, and version owners. Git is a Salesforce recommended version control system that allow team to manage project files. Version control tool. Git is an open source version control tool used by developers across companies and industries to manage project files, including source code. Git give every project to collaborate the flexibility to access the copy of the project repository at any time on their local computer. Project repository. In a version control repository, developers can compile the entire project history and have the option to revert the previous version if needed at any time. Grouping all project resources ensure the teams have access to the centralized single source of truth for effective project management. GitHub is a service provider for Git-based version control tool. Audit to trial of applied changes. Every project collaborate has visibility into all changes added to the project repository, including insight into who made changes and why they were added. Team members can control current and previous version of functionalities and go back to use the earlier version if necessary. Supporting teamwork. GitHub is a collaborative environment for team members working on the same project. Every collaborators share the same project repository and can introduce changing to project files and review the modification that have been already made. I can see some scenario. Several business analysts are working on a new implementation project at Cosmic Enterprise. Anna, one of the BAs, attended a meeting during which it was decided that one of the feature must be redefined to better reflect user needs. Anna opened the right user story and made changes in line with the notes to she took on this call. John, her project collaborator, noticed that several previously described key points in the user story related to the future development disappeared. Even though they are still relevant for the new approach, what can be done to retrieve the previous description of the user story? Anna can go back to the older version of the user story and review the description that was there previously. She can copy all the necessary point and add them to the new version of the user story. These are all some resource I used for it. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe my channel. Thank you.